evening, and that convinced local police to send an officer to check out the situation. An arriving police cruiser discovered the fire, and thus fire trucks were dispatched at 12:27 p.m. to fight what was, at the time, classed as a 2-alarm fire. Firefighters who arrived on the scene said Green and her older daughter were safely outside the house when they arrived. Green was said to be calm, almost unemotional, and the daughter, on the other hand, was distraught and worried about her siblings, begging the firefighters to save them. Firefighters were unable to get into the burning home to look for the siblings due to the fire and worries about the house's structural safety. This fire destroyed almost the entire home, and eventually the younger daughter was discovered in her bed in her nightclothes, deceased probably due to smoke inhalation. The son was found downstairs near the kitchen, also in his nightclothes. It was believed that he passed smoke inhalation as well and then fell through the floor. And that's how he came to be near the kitchen. The surviving members of the family were taken to the police headquarters for questioning. Now, the first person they questioned was Debora Green. She claimed their day had been fairly normal, that the kids had gone to school and performed their chores before attending their after-school activities. Green had taken her younger daughter to a dance class. The dad took the older kids to the son's hockey game. The kids were home by 9 p.m. when her and her children had a late supper. Afterwards, she claimed to have had a drink or two before going to bed. She claimed she only got out of bed once to go down to the kitchen where she spoke with her son, who was also going to bed. This was around 10:30 or 11. She returned to bed around 11 when she received a call from her husband asking who had paged him. It was at this point she mentioned the impending divorce and claimed while the children were upset, she was looking forward to restarting her life. She was awoken around midnight by the fire alarm, and after briefly assuming it was a false alarm, she saw smoke coming under her door and realized there was a fire. She exited the house using a deck connected to the master bedroom and claimed that her son reached out to her through the house intercom, and she told him to wait for help to arrive. Police noted that she referred to her children by their ages, not their name. She referred to them in the past tense, and she did not appear to have been crying, and at several points it seemed even cheerful. Also, she seemed uncertain about the times of certain events, like when she went to bed and when the children went to bed. Green said once she was outside the home, she saw her older daughter on top of the garage, and she encouraged her to jump down. While Green was unable to catch her, she landed with no serious damage. Early in the morning, a detective arrived from the scene to advise that the son and youngest daughter were both found deceased. Green responded with sadness briefly, and then, of course, anger. She shouted at anyone who would listen. She claimed the firefighters had not done enough to save her children. She began to verbally attack the investigators, calling them pathetic, among other things. She demanded to see her husband and the remains of the home, as well as to be the one to tell her husband that their children had passed.
Well, she just sounds like a real doll.
I'm
going to let something out real quick. And it's not going to be yelling or being psycho or anything like that, because I learned my lesson from last time. Listen, no, don't even drink in the first place. Number one. And only if you have a little bit. Because that's not healthy.
Okay, honey, this is not okay. So,
but
just
Mom.
Crystalline, honey, this was not about the drinking. This woman did this.
I know. I needed to continue.
Go ahead, Krysta.
Number 2. Why? Why even blame stuff on the father when he was on the second? He's in a brand new neighborhood. He didn't take anyone nowhere. That did not happen. No. Did they just question Debora?
They questioned the husband too. I'm going to cover all the accounts. They also questioned the older daughter, the one that survived. So we'll cover all of that. Now, after being released from questioning, she had nowhere to stay. Her husband, now even more concerned about his safety at her hands, refused to let her stay with him in his new apartment. Surprise, surprise. But he did give her some cash, which she used to rent a room at a local motel. Her divorce lawyer eventually found her there behaving oddly enough that she committed her to a hospital for observation and treatment. Now, when I say oddly, like, she kept asking if her children were okay, and, like, she would rock back and forth and sing songs about them.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know.
Odd stuff. Now, they questioned the husband after they were done with Green, and the first thing they did was tell him about his children's death. He told police about the deterioration of his marriage as well as the deterioration of his health over the past several months. In August of 95, he had fallen ill with nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. He initially assumed he had gotten a late case of the stomach sickness that many of the others on the Peru trip had suffered through. After he recovered, he seemed to relapse a few days later, and eventually was hospitalized with severe dehydration and fever. He developed multiple other digestive problems, but ascribed them to various causes, and when Maggie suggested that Green was poisoning him, he dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Mm. And when I say, like, other causes, it was the sort of, like, he thought, okay, well, it's because, I'm burning the candle at both ends at work, right. So I need to cut back. Or, I'm in the hospital, I'm eating all this bland food, I come home and resume my normal diet, and that's what's doing it. Or, hey, there's, it's Kansas City, the flu's going around, I'm weak, I got it, He's thinking around the corner. But in September, he was concerned enough that he searched the home and Green's belongings. Yeah, he had a confrontation with her where she said basically she was contemplating suicide, and later she said she wanted Maggie dead. And so he decided to search the house at that point, and he discovered seed packets labeled as castor beans, a copy of an anonymous letter he'd received urging him not to divorce Green, and empty vials of potassium chloride. He asked Green about the seeds later. She claimed she intended to plant them, which he didn't believe because she'd never planted anything in her life as far as he was aware of. And so he kept pushing her, and finally she claimed she was going to use them to commit suicide. She began to drink very heavily after that, prompting him to call the police for assistance in placing her in psychiatric care. Police found him and the kids to be shaken, was the word they used, and described Green's behavior as bizarre, also directly from the police report.
Nice.
And she was very nice to them, but the whole time was screaming obscenities at her husband.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And cops love to be involved with stuff like that.
Well, sure.
Love.
Now, she was taken to a hospital for an assessment, and shortly thereafter she snuck out of the hospital and attempted to walk home. She was retrieved later by the police and agreed to a voluntary commitment at the Menninger Clinic. There she was diagnosed with major bipolar depression and with suicidal impulses, and she was placed on Prozac, Klonopin, and Tranxene.
Oh, jeez.
Now, I don't know Tranxene, never heard of it, but Prozac and Klonopin, they will turn you into a zombie fairly quickly.
Doesn't take a whole lot, yeah.
Her husband said the day of the fire he'd taken off to work the first day of what he intended to be a short vacation to recover some strength after restarting his job post all of his hospitalizations. He'd spent the afternoon with Maggie. He'd taken his children to the hockey game and dropped them off at the family home around 8:45 p.m., then had dinner with Maggie and left her around 11:15 p.m. and went home to his apartment, where he didn't leave until he got the call about the fire. Now, a series of phone calls between him and Green led to a confrontation that evening. He told Green he knew she poisoned him, he believed she was drinking too much and not caring for the children enough, and he said that he might call social services to protect the children if she didn't get a hold of herself. It was shortly thereafter that he received the call about the fire. The police noticed that his eyes were red and his voice was trembling, and that he couldn't believe that she intended to hurt the children. After his interview, he immediately filed for divorce from Green and for custody of their surviving daughter, who was given to his parents while Green was allowed supervised visitation. He was allowed to visit without supervision. And then there's the daughter's account. Now, she was interviewed 2 days later, and she claimed that on the night of the fire, she had woken up and the fire was already going. She saw the smoke in her room. She opened the door, called to her brother, but the hallway was too smoky and or fire laden for her to get out. So she placed the call to 911 that alerted police, but she couldn't speak. So she then crawled out her window onto the roof of the garage to escape the home. She claimed her mom had been terribly worried about the other kids, and when her father showed up, he had been accusatory and combative with her mom. She claimed her mom was a good person and that all the kids respected her, but she was mad at her father for rejecting his mom's request for an amicable separation. The only thing she would admit is that mom had been drinking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
To sort of kind of come back at something you said, I don't care if people drink. Your mom has a drink every now and then. Drinking isn't a bad thing. I don't even mind if people drink when they're in their early 20s. I mean, when I was 21, I had a couple of drunken nights myself, and it convinced me that the best thing for me to ever be was tipsy and nothing more. Because your father drunk tends to vomit a lot, and tends to get drug out of bathrooms at 3 a.m. so some poor girl can pee.
Thanks for sharing.
I'm just saying, I'm going to be honest with my own foibles, but I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't tried
it out. Sure.
Social
Absolutely.
drinking at some point and really tried it. And like I said, it just wasn't anything I was
interested in.
Yeah, I wasn't interested in being out of control. I certainly wasn't interested in being that level of drunk. So tipsy was good. Tipsy was, hey, I'm kind of fun and happy, and now I'm done. I'm not, yeah. I don't want to get past this point. Now, so they investigate. In investigating the remains of the house, poor patterns were discovered. With the natural sources of the fire ruled out, a criminal arson investigation began. The husband's hair and clothes his clothes were confiscated. His hair was investigated. No trace of smoke and singeing were found. Green's hair, which had been cut twice since the fire, was found to be significantly singed. Later, a robe she was wearing was discovered that had also had burns indicating she had been close to the source of the fire.
Mm.
A clerk at a nearby Earl May store listed in Green's address book picked her out as a customer who had ordered several packets of castor beans because they were out of season, so they had to be ordered. And later, when they examined the husband's blood, because he was having surgery on his brain for an abscess, and they were worried he wasn't going to survive. So before they did that, they depositioned him to get his testimony so that they could, just in case he didn't survive, which he did. But he also donated several vials of blood for testing, and the FBI analyst who examined them found so many ricin antibodies that he claimed the husband had to have undergone repeated poisonings. So you were talking about how you can kind of build up an immunity. He was starting to do that. That's what those antibodies do, is they begin to... Now, ricin is one of those poisons that you're never going to become completely immune to. The Soviet Union used it as their standard poison for a long time. Mm-hmm. So, and for that reason.
Don't you feel smart?
Who?
You.
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, not all the time.
Well, your facts played in really well with the story.
Yeah.
Green was arrested November 22nd, 1995 for the arson, the poisoning, and the deaths of her children. In the end, Green took an Alfred plea, and an Alfred plea, Krysta, basically, you're not saying you're guilty. What you were saying is that they have enough evidence to convict you. It's a slight difference, but it is a difference. A lot of people will not say they're guilty, but they will take an Alfred. She was sentenced to a long prison term that wouldn't even allow her to come up for parole for 40 years, at which time she'll be 84. She has started some appeals, but has abandoned them upon learning that if she does appeal and force Kansas to try the case again, they'll put the death penalty back on the table.
She actually did appeal in 2015, she tried to request that they look at her sentence, and a judge overturned that request, stating that because she took the Alfred plea, she knew exactly what she was pleading to and what her sentencing was going to be, and therefore she had accepted that as part of her plea deal. But she did actually try to appeal that. Her attorney said that they would appeal it again